Who were the greatest knights of the medieval era? Today we're ranking the top 12, explained like video game characters, from mercenary bosses to crusader kings. Let's get into it. Geoffroi de Charny. At number 12, we've got Geoffroi de Charny, basically the guy who took knightlife so seriously, he literally wrote the rulebook. His book of chivalry is still one of the clearest windows into how knights thought they were supposed to act. He was born in Burgundy, that's modern-day eastern France, and made his name in tournaments and even on crusade. But what set him apart wasn't some crazy gimmick or flashy move. Charny was all about playing the game straight. Loyalty, courage, honor first. And France trusted him with the Oriflamme, their sacred battle banner. That's like being handed the team's one-of-a-kind legendary weapon and told, don't drop this, ever. At the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, France got wrecked. But Charny refused to surrender. He went down fighting, still clutching the Oriflamme. He didn't end up a king or a legend in ballads, but he's remembered as the knight who lived and died exactly the way his own manual said you should. Ulrich von Liechtenstein. At number 11, meet Ulrich von Liechtenstein, the jousting superstar who basically turned nightlife into medieval performance art. He was born in Styria, modern Austria, to a pretty low-ranking noble family, and instead of making his name in war, Ulrich went all in on tournaments. His playstyle? Total showman. He'd roll up to jousts in wild costumes, sometimes even pretending to be characters from Arthurian legend. His most famous stunt? A Venus tour, where he dressed as the goddess of love herself and rode across Europe, entering jousts in full costume. Yeah, people back then thought it was pretty epic, though most historians agree it's probably a little embellished. Also wrote The Service of Ladies, a mix of autobiography and romantic fantasy that only added to his legend. Unlike most knights, he didn't die in some battle or bloody duel. He passed away peacefully after decades of service. And today, most people know his name because it got borrowed in the movie A Knight's Tale, where Heath Ledger's character uses Ulrich von Liechtenstein as his alias. Hugues de Payens. At number 10, we've got Hugues de Payens, the man who basically invented the most iconic knightly order of all time, the Knights Templar. He was born in Champagne, modern France, and after fighting in the First Crusade, Hugues de Payens helped form a small brotherhood of knights, sworn to protect pilgrims in the Holy Land. What started as a handful of warriors grew under his leadership into the Knights Templar, a full-on powerhouse backed by the Pope himself. Hugues was the first Grand Master of the Templar, and his big moves weren't just military. The order became the first bankers of medieval Europe, running early versions of credit systems for travelers and crusaders. Unlike many who came after him, he didn't die in battle or under torture. Hugues died of natural causes, years before the Templars were hunted down and destroyed. But his legacy? Massive. From Assassin's Creed to Indiana Jones, anytime you see Templars in pop culture, it all traces back to the small brotherhood Hugues de Payens kicked off. John Hawkwood. At number 9, meet John Hawkwood, proof that not every knight was noble. Some just played the game as straight-up mercenaries. He was born in Essex, England, and started out as a regular longbowman in the 100 Years' War. But when he went to Italy, he reinvented himself as a condottiero, a mercenary captain for hire. His playstyle? Cold, efficient, and ruthless. Hawkwood switched sides whenever the price was right, fighting for Florence, Milan, even the Pope. The Italians nicknamed him Giovanni Acuto, which translates to John the Astute. He wasn't about honor, he was about results. And in a time when mercenaries usually burned out fast, Hawkwood pulled off the rare happy ending, dying wealthy and respected in Florence. His legacy stuck. The city buried him with honors in the cathedral, treating this foreign mercenary like a national hero. Not bad for a guy who started as a humble English bowman. At number 8, we've got James Douglas, Robert the Bruce's right-hand man, and England's absolute nightmare during the Scottish Wars of Independence. He was born in Lanarkshire, Scotland, but his family's lands were seized by the English. That loss lit a fire in him, and turned Douglas into one of the most relentless raiders of his time. His playstyle? Pure guerrilla tactics. He mastered night raids, ambushes, and surprise castle seizures. So terrifying were his attacks, English mothers would literally warn their children with his name, "The Black Douglas will get you." He wasn't about glory charges, he was the shadow. He'd strike fast, vanish into the dark, and leave the English living in fear. His most famous moment came after Robert the Bruce's death. Douglas carried the king's embalmed heart in a silver casket, planning to take it on crusade. But on campaign in Spain, he charged into battle against the Moors and was killed, still trying to honor his king's last wish. Douglas's story is equal parts history and folklore, but one thing is clear. He became the living symbol of Scottish resistance, a knight who fought not for wealth or fame, but to make the English pay. He's also featured in the Netflix film The Outlaw King. It's not bad. Check it out. Bertrand du Guesclin. At number 7, we've got Bertrand du Guesclin, nicknamed the Eagle of Brittany, and hands down France's most effective commander of the 100 Years' War. He was born in Brittany to minor nobility, but as a kid he got mocked for being rough-looking and awkward. No one thought he'd amount to much. Turns out he had the brain of a strategist and the heart of a fighter. His rise started with small skirmishes where he proved he could outthink opponents twice his size. Over time, his knack for ambushes, sieges, and defensive warfare made him France's go-to guy. His playstyle? Cunning and patient. He'd wear down enemies, hit them where they least expected it, and turn the tide of battles without even needing the biggest army. Eventually, he rose all the way to Constable of France, the kingdom's highest military post. That's like getting promoted from underrated support role to team captain of the whole squad. He died during the siege of Châteauneuf-de-Randon in 1380. But here's the wild part. The defenders surrendered the fortress as soon as they heard he was dead. That's how much they feared and respected him. Du Guesclin earned royal honors at burial, laid to rest among French kings at Saint-Denis. Not bad for a guy who started out as the ugly kid nobody thought could win a fight. Pierre Terrail, Seigneur de Bayard. At number 6, we've got Pierre Terrail, better known as Bayard, the knight without fear and beyond reproach. He was born in Dauphiné, southeastern France, and rose to fame during the Italian Wars. While other knights were chasing glory and loot, Bayard stood out for something different: his courage and his compassion. His playstyle? Fearless in battle, but also fiercely protective of civilians and prisoners. He fought hard, but he fought fair, and that made even his enemies admire him. There are stories of towns surrendering just because Bayard was leading the charge. They trusted him more than their own fate. That's how strong his reputation was. He thrived in duels, tournaments, and full-scale campaigns alike, all while sticking to a strict code of honor. He became the living model of what true knighthood was supposed to look like, even in an age when most knights were getting cynical about the whole idea. His end came in 1524 when he was mortally wounded by an arquebus, an early firearm, while covering his army's retreat across the Seigneur River. Dying, he asked to be turned toward the enemy so he could face them one last time. Bayard's legend lived on as the final flowering of medieval chivalry. He became the gold standard of what a knight could be, brave in battle and honorable to the very end. Edward the Black Prince. At number 5, we've got Edward of Woodstock, better known as the Black Prince, England's deadliest commander of the 100 Years' War. He was born at Woodstock Palace, the eldest son of King Edward III, and at just 16 years old, he was already leading the vanguard at Crécy in 1346. Picture this, a teenager commanding knights twice his age, standing firm while English longbowmen shredded French cavalry. That one battle instantly made him a legend. His playstyle mixed bold cavalry charges with disciplined archer support. At Poitiers in 1356, he not only crushed another French army, but captured King John II of France. That's the kind of raid boss loot drop most knights could only dream of. But his record wasn't spotless. In 1370, he ordered the sack of Limoges, a brutal massacre of thousands of civilians. Even allies questioned his ruthlessness after that. Despite his military brilliance, he never lived to take the throne. The Black Prince died at 45, worn down by illness, likely dysentery. His black armor gave him the name, but his reputation gave it weight. To France, he was a nightmare. To England, the model warrior prince. And to history, one of the most feared knights of the Middle Ages, Godfrey of Bouillon. To kick off our final four, we've got Godfrey of Bouillon, the crusader knight who became the first ruler of Jerusalem. He was born in Bouillon, in what's now northern France and Belgium. By all accounts, he wasn't the flashiest knight, but he was tough, pious, and relentless, the kind of player who grinds out the long game. Godfrey rose to fame during the First Crusade. He fought at Antioch, marched on Jerusalem, and when the city finally fell in 1099, he was chosen as leader by the other crusaders. Here's the twist: he refused the title of king. Instead, he called himself Defender of the Holy Sepulchre. That's like being offered the crown, saying, "Nah, I just want to protect the Holy City." His playstyle was less about theatrics, more about steady leadership and personal faith. Chronicles say he fought on the front lines, sword in hand, living up to the idea of a knightly protector. His story ended suddenly in 1100, likely illness. He didn't rule long, but his legend lasted for centuries. In medieval Europe, Godfrey became the model crusader. Chroniclers turned him into a saintly figure, a blend of fact and myth. And even today, his name echoes whenever people talk about the age of the Crusades. William Marshal. At number 3, we've got William Marshal, known simply as the Greatest Knight. He was born the younger son of a minor noble, which in medieval terms meant he was starting with no inheritance, no power, no easy path. If this were a game, he's the guy rolling in with the weakest starting stats. So how did he rise? By absolutely dominating the tournament scene. Marshal racked up victory after victory, turning jousts and melees into his personal money farm. He earned wealth, fame, and a reputation as a knight nobody could beat. His playstyle? Consistency and loyalty. He wasn't the flashiest, but he was relentless, a knight who kept winning year after year, until even kings started trusting him with everything. Marshal served 4 different English monarchs, always managing to survive palace intrigue, civil war, and rebellion. By the end of his life, he wasn't just a famous knight. He was regent of England, basically ruling the kingdom for the young Henry III. Unlike so many others on this list, he didn't go out in a blaze of glory. He died peacefully after securing the throne for his king. Chroniclers remembered him as undefeated, maybe a little exaggerated, but the fact that anyone believed it says it all. William Marshal proved you don't need a royal birth or a crusader crown to end up on top. All it takes is loyalty, skill, and the grit to outlast everyone else. El Cid. At number 2, we've got Rodrigo Diaz de Novar, better known as El Cid, Spain's legendary champion of the Reconquista. He was born near Burgos, in Castile, and first rose under King Sancho II, earning the title Campeador, or champion. But court rivalries got him exiled, and that's when El Cid really carved out his legend. He fought for both Christian and Muslim rulers, switching sides when he had to, building his own power base instead of depending on kings who didn't trust him. His playstyle? Adaptive. He could be a knight, a mercenary, a warlord, or a diplomat, whatever kept him in the game. Eventually, he seized the city of Valencia and ruled it as his own lordship. That wasn't just survival, that was leveling up to boss status. He died in 1099, but even in death, the stories kept growing. According to legend, his men strapped his body to a horse and charged him into one last battle, terrifying the enemy into retreat. It's probably myth, but it shows how larger than life El Cid had become. His legacy is everywhere. Epic poems, Spanish folklore, and modern pop culture like the TV series The Legend of El Cid. El Cid wasn't just a knight. He was a survivor, a conqueror, and a national symbol whose legend outlived the man himself. Richard the Lionheart. At number 1, we've got Richard I of England, better known as Richard the Lionheart, the Crusader king, the knight who became legend. He was born at Beaumont Palace in Oxford, the son of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine. From the start, Richard stood out for his boldness in battle. Even before becoming king, he led rebellions against his own father and proved he had the guts to command. As king, he became the star of the Third Crusade. His playstyle, leading from the very front. Richard wasn't the type to hang back and issue orders. He was the guy charging in, sword raised, with his knights following behind. His greatest rival was Saladin, the Muslim Sultan of Egypt and Syria. The two clashed across the Holy Land, and while Richard never retook Jerusalem, he won battles that kept his legend alive for centuries. But his story ended in 1199, when a crossbow bolt struck him during a minor siege in France. Even the Lionheart couldn't tank that hit. Richard's legacy is part history, part myth. Chronicles and ballads turned him into the ultimate knightly king. Robin Hood tales made him the hero king who would return and set things right. Was he really the greatest knight ever? That's up for debate, but no medieval knight's name echoes louder across history than Richard the Lionheart. And that's the roster. 12 knights who defined the Middle Ages in their own way. Some fought with honor, some played dirty, and some became legends bigger than history itself. So, who do you think deserves the crown? Richard the Lionheart, El Cid, William Marshal, or someone else entirely? Drop your pick in the comments and tell us who you think would win if they all spawned into the same match.